Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me to speak about this topic that I'm so passionate about. I actually come from a healthcare background. I worked in healthcare for 15 years prior to starting my business. The topic of the connection between your home and your health is something that I just love talking about. So, the last few years, more and more research has been done that addresses this huge connection between clutter and our physical and mental health and well being. And so today I'm going to share some of that research with you and talk about the connection that clutter can actually have on our health. And then I'll share with you some steps that you can take to gain control of your environment. So during our presentation today, we'll be talking about clutter. What is clutter and how did we get here? The differences between situational disorganization and hoarding, because there is this difference. Oftentimes people think that I'm a hoarder. Oh my gosh, I've got so many things in my home because I've lived there for so long. When in actuality, it's not truly hoarding. From there, we'll go into the impact of clutter on physical health, mental health, overall well being. And then we'll talk about why it's so beneficial to declutter. We'll get into then where to start. And at the end, we'll leave a few minutes for question and answer. So let's dive right in. So, what is clutter? Well, if you look up in the dictionary, clutter is a crowded or confused mass or collection. So, it's things that don't serve a purpose in our life today. So, that includes those just in case items. You might need it one day. All of those clothes that just don't fit, that we've stuffed into our closet, that we haven't taken the time to go through, old books that we haven't looked at, just those things that we really aren't using. Unfinished items. So those are projects that we started, hobbies that, okay, I told myself with the lockdown, all right, I'm going to start crocheting. So you bought all these spools of yarn and all these crochet supplies. But then life resumed, things got busy again, and there sits the supplies. Or even items that need repaired. How many times are we keeping, okay, I'm going to fix that lamp. It just needs rewired. I'm going to keep it just because, I'll get to it one day. But again, that's an unfinished project. And then lastly, anything that you do not use, love, or need. So this comes into just the excess, those doubles. Okay, I might need this. We just tend to accumulate those items over and over. So when you really break it down, clutter is nothing more than a series of delayed decisions. It's things that we need to act upon, but we're just delaying that decision. So how did we get here? Well, the first thing is just life. Life happens. Major life events happen, loss of a loved one, moving, downsizing, marriage, divorce, birth, adoption. These are all major life events that involve an influx of a lot of things. For example, even if you've lived in your home for 30, 40 years, you've accumulated a lot of possessions over that period of time. Next one is overwhelm. Things have piled up over those 40 years that you've been in your home. And so you've deferred making those decisions. If you can't decide what to do with something, a lot of times it goes into the garage or it goes into the basement. It goes in those boxes and it just sits there. And it gets to the point where you start to, okay, I know I need to do this. I know I need to take the time to go through those boxes, but you're overwhelmed. You don't know where to start. You can't decide where something belongs. And things just continue to accumulate and accumulate and build and build. And then we continue this accumulation, but we're never really eliminating anything out of the home, again, because we're overwhelmed. And then I think too, mindset is a huge portion. It's society's taught us in recent years that possessions are going to make you happy. You need bigger, better, more and more. And we're trying to buy that internal happiness. You see a lot of this on social media. It's like, okay, if you buy this, this is going to change your life. Even Home Shopping Network and QVC have been doing this forever. How many times do you sit down and you start watching and you're thinking, okay, I don't need this product. But by the end of their 15-minute spiel, you're thinking, this is going to change my life. So again, it's just that mindset that, okay, this product, this thing is going to make me happy. So, why? At the end of the day, why do we hold on to things? Well, fear of letting go, scarcity mindset. A lot of our older generations, they have parents that lived through the Depression. This was a time where you kept everything because of that scarcity. The thinking of, I might need it later. One day I'm going to use this. Money is another reason we tend to hold on to things. Things cost money. So you feel guilty if you spent a lot of money on an object, but then you're not using it. So then that kicks in feelings of guilt, which we'll get to in a minute. Another reason, waiting to prepare the item, back to our lamp. That, okay, I know I need to do this one day, but again, just that one day is always tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. And as the saying goes, tomorrow never comes. It's interesting because the average home, they did a study out in California, the average home contains over 300,000 items, which is insane. And over 25% of Americans with a garage can't actually park in the garage because it's filled with so much stuff. Another reason we tend to hold on to things is guilt. Guilt because it was a gift. We feel guilty because our grandkids made us all these amazing art projects and we just don't want to let them go. But at the same time, it's like, okay, you have this whole giant tote now. Okay, so what are you going to do with it? Again, down to the basement it goes to sit. I always tell my clients, it's okay. The act of giving was the gift. I don't think anyone is intentionally giving you an item and thinking as they give you the item, you know what? I want this one item to be a burden on you forever and ever. And every time you see it, you're going to feel guilty about getting rid of it. So it's just, it feeds into the, okay, I'm going to hold on to it because I feel guilty. And then sentimental reasons, which again goes back to what we just spoke about. But gradually this clutter continues to build and build and build, but so gradually that we don't even realize what a weight it is that's holding us down. And that leads into what we'll get to in a minute is that increased physical burden, that emotional burden, and that health burden as well. So let's talk for a minute about just situational disorganization and hoarding. So, hoarding is defined as continually accumulating a variety of items that are often considered useless or worthless by others, accompanied by an inability to discard the items without great distress. And it's that last phrase that discarding of the items without great distress is the key phrase here. So this is where someone is excessively accumulating items that there's no space for. It's building up of items to the point where rooms are not usable anymore. If you suggest to this person, okay, you know what, you don't need 100 empty Cool Whip containers, they physically cannot bring themselves to get rid of it. It will invoke feelings of panic, anxiety, distress. There's a huge psychological component to hoarding disorders. So, if someone you love if you suspect that they have a hoarding disorder, it's very important that you address the mental health component of it. And there are amazing counselors out there that can help these clients work through these things because it is a mental health condition. Hoarding ends up being, a buildup of clutter to where you can't use the room. Safety issues occur because those walkways are blocked. You can't sit on the couch because there's so many items stacked to the ceiling. So it runs a lot deeper than just things with hoarding disorders. Whereas situational disorganization is where most of us are. It's those life changes. It's being in the house for a long time. It's those events that have resulted in disorganization. So, how in the world does clutter, stuff, impact our physical health? Well, the first is falls. Falls are the leading cause of home related deaths in the United States. If you have so much clutter built up in your home, when you're reaching for something, piles may be falling over on you. It causes tripping hazards. You're trying to walk through your office where you have all these boxes and you didn't see the cord there. These are preventable accidents. So, by decreasing the clutter, we improve the safety of your home. The next one's fire hazard. A lot of times, paper builds up, especially in areas around sources of heat, vents, even space heaters, and that heat can cause a fire. And then, if you have all the clutter, perhaps the clutter is blocking one of your exits. Maybe you have a room that there is an exterior door, but you've blocked it because you don't use that room often. Well, now you've blocked an exit in case there is a fire and you need to be able to get out quickly. The next impact of clutter on your physical health is respiratory issues. Stuff holds a lot of dust. Dust harbors mites, allergens. It can cause issues with breathing, asthma, mold. The buildup of clutter causes us to be unable to clean things quite as thoroughly. We're not talking about having an immaculate home here, but we're talking about, okay, there's so much dust because there's so many things that's really impacting our respiratory system. Pests and rodents, they love those wonderful dark spaces that clutter creates. So, in the basement, if you have all these boxes piled up, you're creating these perfect little nesting places for all of these mice and rodents. And a lot of times you don't even know that they're hiding in there. The next impact is on eating habits, which is kind of surprising. But we'll get to this a little bit more in a second when we talk about cortisol. So there's a stress hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is released when your body feels threatened. Cortisol also stimulates our hunger. So when we're feeling stressed, when we have all this clutter around us that's triggering us to feel a certain way, we have that cortisol release. So we're more likely to make poor decisions when we're choosing things. We tend to use snacking as a coping mechanism. So then we're consuming more calories, which can cause us to gain more weight. And then when our environment's cluttered, that's another trigger, again, to cause us to eat more. That overwhelm continues. We keep snacking using those coping mechanisms. Clutter also affects our energy levels. Um, when you have a decluttered environment, cleaning is up to 40% faster. Um, so that's a huge time saver. You think about it, 40%. If you had 40% less time spent on cleaning, you're going to have a lot more energy to do different things throughout your day. Also, the feeling of overwhelm and anxiety, it causes us to be less motivated. So when we're feeling less motivated, our energy levels drop. And what's one of the best things we can do for our energy levels? Well, it's exercise. It's that physical activity. But when our energy levels are low, it's really hard to find that motivation to exercise. You have to start to think of everything in your home takes energy to maintain. Whether you want to or not, it really does. Clutter is staying in our homes until we're making that conscious decision to get rid of it. And clutter can also impact our sleep. It's that laying awake in the middle of the night thinking, okay, I know I put an item somewhere. I don't remember where I put it. Or I needed to get this done, but because X, Y, and Z happened, I didn't get that done. So then that just triggers our mind over and over. And again, it stimulates that thought process and feeling of overwhelm, which can impact our sleep. So now that we've talked about your physical health, let's dive a little deeper into mental health. So I want you to stop for a minute and think of the feeling when you walk into a spa. That environment is uncluttered. It's quiet, it's calm, it's relaxed, it's very simple. Now, on the flip side, I want you to think about walking into a garage that is so packed full of things that you can't even make your way into the doorway. Or you walk down into the basement that has just boxes and things strewn about that you can't get to your fuse box without jumping over box after box after box. So, what clutter does, and this is again where we're going to talk about cortisol, that stress hormone. So, cortisol is released when we feel stressed. So, our thoughts begin to become cluttered, which then, because of that cortisol, it can actually impair our memory. There is a huge correlation between the number of items we own in our home and the levels of cortisol. So the more items, the higher those cortisol levels are. And what happens is it goes back to the whole fight or flight mechanism. So over time, if our body is constantly feeling on edge, what happens is we're releasing that cortisol. Over time, it starts to have negative effects. So it increases our blood pressure. It can cause those poor eating patterns, which can lead to obesity. It can lead to sleep issues. And then over time, the prolonged stress can increase our risk of cancer, heart disease, susceptibility to colds and flu. It saps our energy, it causes fatigue, and increases those negative thoughts, which then increase those anxious feelings. So it's a vicious cycle that goes around and around and around because our brain is constantly processing the world around us. Whether we like it or not, it's taking everything in. And our brains love nothing more than order and control. So you have the clutter around you. You're constantly overstimulating your brain because you're getting that input. You're processing all those stimuli that are coming in that really aren't important. And that makes it difficult to relax physically and mentally. The next is overwhelm and frustration. So, again, clutter weighs us down physically and mentally. Things get out of control, they build up to the point where we don't know where to start. So, then these negative thought patterns kick in. And we stop enjoying our homes, whether we realize it or not, and we start resenting them because we can't relax. It's not that spa like feeling. It's a place of, oh, yeah, I need to remember to get this fixed. I need to remember this needs done. Oh, yeah, those clothes don't fit me. Every time, if you're keeping all those clothes that don't fit, every time you're opening your closet, it's staring you in the face. It's triggering you. It's reminding you, oh, you still haven't lost the weight yet. So again, it's just going back to those triggers. The next one is our relationships. So when a large portion of our time and energy are spent maintaining the things we own, we have less time and energy to give to our loved ones. We might feel ashamed to have friends over because we don't like how our home looks. We feel like, oh my gosh, it's so out of control. I don't want anyone to see this. So we begin to retreat. It can cause us to be frustrated with the amount of work that needs to be done in our home. We get frustrated because we're constantly searching for things that we know we have somewhere, but we can't find them. And this can actually be then directed towards our families, causing more resentment. Why isn't the garage cleaned up? Why are you keeping this? Why do you have so many things? And again, we just feel ashamed. The next reason is guilt of those unfinished projects, of those reminders of the constant to dos, the things that don't fit, those negative thought patterns continue to repeat over and over. Our home becomes a stressor versus that retreat. I love, there's an author named Gretchen Rubin. She wrote a book called Outer Order, Inner Calm. And it's really true when you take the time to think about, okay, I know that when I'm in a space that is just not cluttered, it's clean, I feel better. I feel better mentally. And lastly, clutter can impact levels of anxiety and depression. If we're going about our day doing a task and then we get distracted, 45% of the time we actually forget about what we were doing prior to the distraction and don't actually come back to that task. 45%. And then happiness. So clutter's impacting your mood. If you're constantly searching for things that you can't find, you're going to get irritated. You're going to get frustrated. And then those negative self talk patterns kick in. Those thoughts of, I should be more organized. How did I get here? Why did I let this happen? How long will it take me to get organized? And then we start dwelling more and more on those negative thoughts. And then things don't get done. I think this graphic perfectly describes things. It talks about the clutter, anxiety, depression cycle. This is a study that was done by UCLA about how increased clutter relates to increased stress. So, again, that constant visual clutter starts to overload our brains and our ability to focus. And then we become distracted and don't return to the tasks at hand. So, in short, what's happening is, all right, clutter's been building up for a while. So, you start to feel a little bit anxious, a little bit stressed. What happens then? You clean up a little less because you don't have the energy. Then that clutter builds up more. So, that then causes you to start to feel more anxious. So, that anxiety causes more overwhelm, can lead to even depression. So then, because we're feeling depressed and we're feeling overwhelmed, we feel more unmotivated, and then the clutter continues to pile up. So it's just this revolving circle of anxiety, depression, clutter, overwhelm, building, building, building until we decide to take action. How can our clutter impact our well being? Well, first is space. A lot of times I think we become good at thinking of our homes as a storage facility. Well, it's not. Use your space as it's intended. Consider how much space these items are taking up. For each item that we keep in our homes, they're using our space, our time, our money. They're filling that space and making it feel crowded and cluttered and overwhelming. And then what happens so many times is because we have accumulated so many things, we think we need a bigger house. We think we need a storage facility. But a lot of times we really don't need more space. We just need to be intentional about what we're putting in that space. Clutter also impacts freedom. It ties us down and creates that burden. The more you own, the more you have to take care of all those items, manage those items, pay for those items. You can't use your time and energy how you want to use it. But when you take the time to declutter, you gain that freedom. You gain that control of your environment so that you can use your energy how you want to. Time. Time is huge. I love reading about clutter. So there's another study that analyzed Americans 55 minutes a day on average spent looking for things is what the average American spends. You think about that. That's almost an hour out of our day just looking for different things, whether it's a file on the computer, whether it's a shirt you thought was clean, but it's not. There's so many things, just those little minute here, seconds there, it adds up. And again, then leads to more time spent cleaning. It leads to more time getting ready because you can't find the things you need. So it's all about developing those habits of, okay, you know what? If I am going to pick it up, I'm going to put it back where it belongs at the end of the day. Just those few seconds of those little habit changes can start to make such a world of a difference. There's been a lot of discussion too in recent studies about productivity and how clutter really impacts in the workplace our productivity throughout the day. And again, it goes back to that visual overstimulation. You can't focus, and then it's that to do list that becomes never ending. Mental clutter. There's a recent study that came out. Mental clutter is actually suspected to be part of the cause of memory loss related to aging. And then lastly, another impact of clutter on well-being is money. You're spending money on late fees because you lost the bill. You're missing receipts so you couldn't do a tax write-off. You're spending more on moving expenses. You're spending money on duplicate purchases because you can't find an item that you thought you had. You couldn't find it, so you went out and bought a new one. And then, a few weeks later, you found it. Every year, Americans spend $2.7 billion in replacement costs. Billion, not million, not thousand, $2.7 billion just because we couldn't find something. So we're paying to replace that item. So all of that's a lot. It's heavy, but there's good news. Clutter is a modifiable stressor. We can gain control, and it just takes a few steps. So, what are the benefits of decluttering? Less stress. We're improving those relationships because we're not ashamed to have people over. We're in control of our time. We're in control of our surroundings. We don't have those constant feelings of guilt because we're seeing all those projects that we didn't finish. We're not feeling as frustrated because we're not constantly searching. We're breaking that cycle of more, more, more. It leads to more energy. You're not spending as much time searching and cleaning. You're developing those healthier habits. You're getting that motivation to exercise, to move. It improves your physical health and well being. You're gaining time, less searching, improved focus and productivity. You're going back to the 55 minutes a day. When you actually break that down, that breaks down to almost 2 weeks per calendar year searching for those things. So, really taking that little bit of time to declutter in the long run will give you so much more time, more space. You have room for the things that you have. You can have family and friends over. Using that space as intended. For example, your garage. You can actually park the car in there versus it just being a home to things that you're not going to realistically use again. Saving money, again, not paying those late fees, not buying those replacement items. And then also a decreased burden on your family. So it's inevitable. There's two things in life that are guaranteed: death and taxes. So when we pass, because it's something that will happen to all of us, someone has to deal with all of our stuff. So if we take the time to declutter or to go through those items with our family, we can really decrease some of that burden that's put onto everyone. How often have we seen, a loved one pass away and then that family is just spending weeks and weeks sorting through things and papers and piles and trying to figure out, okay, what's important, what's not, so that you're not getting rid of a family heirloom or something that is important. More benefits of decluttering. So better mood, you feel empowered, those cortisol levels, that stress hormone decreasing. You feel empowered now because you gain control of your environment. You're sleeping better because you're not constantly thinking of those things that you didn't accomplish. You can focus more, have that clarity. You're eliminating that sensory overload, which will help improve your memory. Physical and mental health benefits. Your blood pressure decreases because those cortisol levels are again dropping. Weight loss because you're not mindlessly snacking, using those coping mechanisms of snacking, improving those relationships, and again, gaining that freedom. So that's all fine and dandy, but where do we even start? So when we don't define our space turns into a dumping ground. How many times have you bought a piece of fitness equipment and thought, okay, I'm going to walk on this treadmill every single day, and then that treadmill becomes the world's most expensive coat rack? Everybody's done it. Everybody has defined or turned a space into something it wasn't intended for. Sometimes it's out of necessity. Other times it's just, all right, it's delayed decisions. I don't want to think about it. I'm just going to throw it here. It's easier to throw this sweater here than to fold it and put it away. So the most common mistake I see when I'm working with clients is they say, okay, this is great. So I am going to get organized. So they go out to the store and they buy all these bins. So these storage solutions, what they do is they tend to cause people just to hide the clutter. You go to the Home Depot, you buy the big plastic bins, and you're like, okay, you put everything in those bins. Well, that's great. It looks a little bit better. But if you're not taking the time to declutter, you're having the same problem. You're putting things into containers, you're wasting space, and you're buying more because now you can't see what's in the container and you have all the same stuff just put into containers. So, decluttering is absolutely essential prior to getting those storage solutions. So, what are some common challenges? Well, the top three challenges I see when I'm working with clients, number one is time. None of us really have enough time in the day, we feel, between appointments and life, it just goes by so fast. So, I actually tell my clients, take time and schedule it. Schedule an appointment with yourself on your calendar. Call up one of your kids, call up a family member and say, you know what? I need help. And that's hard. That is so hard to do. And those three words are some of the hardest words for myself to say too. I need help. But asking for help can make the process so much easier. It eases that burden. So even if, say, you don't have anyone in town, all right, schedule time on the calendar. If an hour seems like too much, set a timer for 5 minutes. Start with one drawer. Let's just start. And slowly, as you start to gain control, that momentum starts building. It's important to realize this is not HGTV. It is not 1 hour and your space is completely organized. This is an ongoing process. We live in our homes, so we need to be able to take control. It's an ongoing process. But when you break it down into those manageable tasks, those smaller periods of time, when you ask for help, it just makes the process so much easier, less of a burden. Another common barrier is money. People think that, okay, I need to go out and buy all of these bins. I don't have money for bins. I don't want to buy the bins. No, use what you have. If you're going through and decluttering, a lot of times you don't need to buy anything. It's just being, again, intentional with what is in your home. And always take the time when you do decide, okay, say you decide you need a storage solution. I want you to take the time to consider the function of the item. So, does this just look nice? Is it just fancy? Or does it actually, will it work for you? I talk about this with kids and staying organized all the time. Kids are very simple creatures. If you create a system that has too many steps, they're not going to do it. If you know yourself, if there's too many steps, if you're not going to do it, then don't. It's okay. Everything in your kitchen does not need to be perfectly decanted. That's okay. You need to figure out what works best for you. And then emotions, especially when it comes to sentimental items. Please don't start your decluttering journey with your sentimental items. And when you do get to the point where you're ready to address those sentimental items, bring in family members, ask for help. Don't go it alone. It's just hard because, it triggers so many memories. And then you go down memory lane and it's, before you know it, 5 hours have passed. So don't start with those sentimental items. And then again, it goes back to the whole guilt thing that we talked about earlier. It was the act of giving that was the gift. So if it's something you really don't like, I don't ever think that person that gave you the gift would intend it to be a burden on you for the rest of your life. So it's okay to let it go or see if someone could have a better use for it. Like, all right, I'm really not going to use this realistically. Would you be able to benefit from its use? So sometimes that can help make that a little bit easier. And then display things. So many times we hide things that are so valuable to us. But okay, if it's a really neat item, display it so you can actually enjoy it versus just sitting in a box. And then I think quite possibly the biggest challenge is overwhelm. You just feel overwhelmed. It goes back to that clutter, anxiety, stress cycle. Where do you even start? when you are just so overwhelmed by the amount of things to do, it goes back to saying every journey begins with one step. So I like to tell my clients start where you are, one small area, one drawer, your purse, a small area, and start with the obvious. Go through that space, throw away the trash, throw away the expired, throw away the things you're not using, and then use what you have. Again, you don't need to go out right off the bat and buy a whole bunch of products. Use what you have. Even if you look online, Pinterest is a great resource for this, of different ways to organize on a budget, finding different ways of storing your objects so that it's more accessible for you. Do what you can. So, again, set that timer, start with that one pile. It allows you to feel that sense of empowerment, that sense of accomplishment that I can do this. I can gain control of my environment. And make sure you're giving yourself grace. At the end of the day, this is not an all or nothing. It's not a one and done type of thing. It's an ongoing. But at the end of the day, it's a form of self care. You're prioritizing your feelings and how your environment makes you feel and gaining control over your environment versus your environment controlling you. And then lastly, make sure to get the trash out. So when you go through, get the trash out. Those items that you decided, you know what, I want to donate those. Take them right away or schedule that appointment. Salvation Army has resumed their pickups. They'll come pick it up for you. Get them out of your house. Don't drive around with those donations in your trunk for the next 4 months because that happens. They're out of the house, but in your trunk. You need to actually make that time, put it on your calendar. Okay, today I'm going to drop these donations off. A lot of times, clients ask me, well, it might be worth money. I could sell this. Okay, well, that absolutely, that can be the case sometimes. I always encourage people look on eBay for what those items have actually sold for. The way we value them and what we think we can get for them versus reality can sometimes be two totally different things. So always take that time just to do a quick sneak peek. Okay, is this actually worth my time to sell this item? And then again, the last and most important step to decrease that feeling of overwhelm is again asking for help. Family members and friends are there for you. They're willing to help. And it just makes such a difference. It's hard, but sometimes just having that objective opinion and that extra set of eyes on things to help you through it can make all the difference. So, in closing, clutter really has an impact on us physically, emotionally, mentally, but we can gain control.